Cruising at 35,000 feet over the Pacific, a routine charter flight becomes a death trap when both pilots collapse simultaneously. Panic grips the cabin, but one quiet passenger holds a dangerous secret buried in military black ops. When fighter jets lock missiles and move in for the kill, an unexpected radio transmission changes everything. Viper is back in the sky. Clarissa Robinson appeared to be nothing more than a high school physics teacher on her way to a boring educational symposium. Seated in 12A of a chartered Boeing 737-800, she adjusted her thick-rimmed glasses, flipped a page of her paperback novel, and methodically ignored the high-pitched whine of the twin turbofan engines. To the 50-odd passengers aboard Flight 408, distribute mostly fellow educators and district administrators, she was simply Ms. Robinson, the quiet woman who brought excellent snickerdoodles to faculty meetings, the one with an encyclopedic knowledge of aerodynamics that seemed oddly specific for a physics teacher. Nobody on that aircraft knew that 12 years ago, Clarissa wore a flight suit instead of a cardigan. 12 years ago, she strapped herself into the cockpit of an F-15E Strike Eagle and tore through hostile skies at Mach 2.5. She had been one of the very few female fighter aces in modern military history. 5 confirmed air-to-air kills, dozens of high-risk ground strikes, all under the call sign Viper. She had been a legend. Then abruptly, she was gone. A classified mission over hostile territory went spectacularly wrong. Her wingman perished in a fireball. The operation was buried in black ink. Clarissa quietly surrendered her wings, locking her past inside a mental vault she swore never to open again. She wanted normalcy. She wanted quiet. For over a decade, she successfully maintained the illusion. She never looked up when military jets roared overhead. She never renewed her civilian pilot's license. She simply faded into the mundane rhythm of civilian life. But aviation, like a dormant instinct, never truly leaves a pilot's blood. Flight 408 was halfway between Seattle and Anchorage, cutting through thick stratocumulus clouds over the Pacific Ocean, when the illusion of safety fractured. Captain David Lawson, a 30-year veteran, was casually adjusting the autopilot while sipping lukewarm coffee. His co-pilot, First Officer Brian Halloway, had been fighting a severe stomach bug since takeoff. 5 minutes earlier, Brian had unbuckled his harness and retreated to the forward lavatory. He never came back. Clarissa felt the subtle shift in cabin pressure first. It was a minuscule change, something an ordinary passenger would dismiss as a popped ear. But Clarissa's internal altimeter was finely tuned from years of precision flying. She looked up from her book. The flight attendants were gathered near the lavatory door, their faces tight with concern. One of them, a young woman named Sarah, was knocking frantically. Then the aircraft jerked. It wasn't the bumpy, rhythmic jostle of clear air turbulence. It was a sharp, uncoordinated yaw to the left, followed by a sickening drop in the nose. The heavy Boeing shuddered as the autopilot violently disengaged with an audible warning chime. Clarissa's heart slammed against her ribs. Muscle memory, dormant for 4,380 days, instantly awoke. She knew that feeling. The aircraft was entering a slip. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." A trembling flight attendant's voice crackled over the PA. Before the announcement finished, the plane pitched downward. The cabin erupted into terrified screams. Loose cups, laptops, magazines went weightless, floating briefly before crashing against the ceiling. Clarissa did not scream. Her eyes narrowed instantly. Pitch angle, 15 degrees nose down. Bank angle, 30 degrees left. Increasing. Clarissa unbuckled her seatbelt, fighting the negative G-forces that threatened to lift her into the overhead bins. The man next to her grabbed her arm, his face pale. "What are you doing? Sit down!" "Let go of me," Clarissa commanded, her voice dropping the soft, teacher-like cadence and adopting a sharp, authoritative edge that cut through the panic. She pulled herself up the tilted aisle, hand over hand along the seatbacks. Flight attendants were clinging to the galley counters, crying, "Open that door!" Clarissa shouted, pointing at the reinforced cockpit door. "We can't! It's locked! First Officer Halloway is unconscious in the bathroom, and Captain Lawson isn't answering the intercom." Clarissa didn't hesitate. She grabbed the heavy fire axe mounted behind a glass panel. One precise, brutal swing shattered the glass. She retrieved the tool and turned to the emergency access keypad. She knew the standard override codes for Boeing commercial flights, knowledge retained from obsessive reading of aviation manuals during her civilian years. She punched in the emergency sequence. A red light blinked green. The door clicked unlocked. She threw herself into the cockpit. The scene was a nightmare, blaring alarms, flashing lights, the master caution panel glowing fiercely red. bank angle, pull up, terrain," a mechanical voice rhythmically chanted. Captain David Lawson was slumped completely forward over the control yoke, his hands locked in a death grip. His face was ashen, his lips tinted blue. A massive cardiac arrest had paralyzed him. The dead weight of his body was forcing the control column forward and to the left, driving the airliner into a graveyard spiral. "Help me get him off the stick," Clarissa yelled. Sarah crawled into the cockpit behind her. Together, fighting tremendous gravitational pull, they hauled the unconscious captain backward, unlatching his harness and letting him slide to the floor. Clarissa threw herself into the left seat. For a microsecond, 12 years of buried trauma flashed behind her eyes. The last time she held controls this tightly, her wingman's jet was erupting into a fireball over the desert. The ghosts of the past screamed at her, begging her to freeze. Instead, Viper took over. The altimeter unwound at terrifying speed. They'd plummeted from 35,000 feet to 14,000 in less than 2 minutes. The airspeed indicator crept dangerously close to the red line, the maximum structural limit of the aircraft. "Pull up, terrain! Pull up!" the ground proximity warning system screamed. Clarissa planted her feet on the rudder pedals. She didn't yank the yoke. At this speed, doing so would overstress the airframe and cause catastrophic structural failure. Instead, she applied firm, steady, agonizingly calculated pressure. She fed in right rudder to counteract the steep left bank, balancing the heavy commercial jet as if wrestling a sluggish, overweight bomber. The G-forces spiked, pressing her violently into the seat. Behind her, the cabin groaned, the metal composite protesting under extreme aerodynamic load. Slowly, agonizingly, the nose began to lift. The descent rate slowed. 10,000 feet, 8,000, 6,000. At 4,000 feet above the dark, churning waves of the Pacific, the aircraft finally leveled out. Clarissa exhaled a ragged breath, her hands shaking slightly against the leather yoke. She quickly adjusted the throttles, stabilizing airspeed, and engaged the auto-throttle. She glanced at the navigational display. Her stomach dropped. During the uncontrolled descent, the aircraft had drifted violently off its filed flight plan. They were no longer safely over international waters heading toward Alaska. They had veered sharply east, cutting straight toward heavily restricted airspace off the coast of Washington state, an exclusion zone used for classified naval deployments. Clarissa reached for the radio console, her fingers flying over the dials to tune guard frequency 121.5 megahertz. Before she could press the push-to-talk switch, the radio crackled to life with a harsh, authoritative voice. "Unidentified aircraft squawking 7700. This is the United States Air Force. You have entered restricted airspace. Divert your course immediately to heading 290. Acknowledge immediately or you will be intercepted and subject to lethal force." Clarissa's eyes darted to the window. Bursting through the cloud deck on her left, moving with predatory grace, was a grey silhouette she recognized instantly. Diamond-shaped wings, twin canted tail fins, distinct stealth profile. An F-22 Raptor. A second one appeared on her right, boxing the crippled airliner in. Through the thick cockpit glass, Clarissa could see the pilot in the left Raptor. He was close, terrifyingly close, flying off her wingtip. Underneath his Raptor's wing, the bay doors were open, exposing an AIM-9X Sidewinder missile. They were not bluffing. "Sarah," Clarissa said calmly, not taking her eyes off the fighter jet, "are they going to shoot us down?" Not if I can help it, Clarissa muttered. She pressed the radio switch. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Civilian Charter Flight 408. Be advised, both the captain and first officer are medically incapacitated. I have assumed manual control of the aircraft. I'm experiencing navigational system errors following a severe altitude drop. Attempting to comply with heading 290. There was a pause. The military controllers were scrambling to process the fact that a calm, authoritative female voice was piloting a Boeing 737 that was supposed to be plunging into the ocean. Flight 408, this is Raptor Lead. Identify yourself. Are you a certified commercial pilot? Clarissa looked directly at the F-22 on her wing. The insignia on the tail flashed in the sunlight. The 91st Fighter Squadron, the Dice Man. Raptor Lead, this is Clarissa Robinson. I am a passenger. I do not hold a current commercial aviation license. Heavy silence on the radio. Flight 408, we are running your name through the FAA database. We have no record of a Clarissa Robinson holding any flight certifications. You are commanding a heavy aircraft in a restricted high-security zone. If this is a hostile takeover, you have exactly 10 seconds to turn this aircraft around before I put a missile through your left engine. The Raptor drifted closer, perfectly matching her speed, an unspoken threat hanging in the freezing air between them. They thought she was a hijacker, a terrorist who had disabled the crew and taken the yoke to crash the plane into a military asset. Clarissa felt a cold, familiar calm wash over her. The panic of the civilian world faded completely, replaced by the icy, calculated precision of the fighter pilot she used to be. 12 years of hiding were about to end. But if blowing her cover was the only way to save the 50 souls sleeping in the cabin behind her, she would burn her quiet life to the ground. Raptor Lead, Clarissa said, her voice dropping an octave, slipping effortlessly into the clipped tactical cadence of military comms. You can check the FAA database all you want, but you're looking in the wrong system. Connect me to NORAD Command immediately. Flight 408, you will comply. Patch me through, Lieutenant, Clarissa barked, the absolute authority in her voice making the young pilot physically flinch in his cockpit. You tell NORAD Command that authentication code Tango Bravo 97 is currently flying this heavy. You tell them that Viper has the stick, and you tell them to get me a goddamn vector to the nearest medical runway before my captain dies on this deck. The radio went dead. The static hissed softly. Outside, the F-22 maintained its rigid formation, but Clarissa could see the pilot's helmet tilt slightly as he frantically communicated with his command center on a secure frequency. 30 seconds passed. It felt like 30 years. Finally, the radio clicked back on. When the voice returned, it wasn't the young, aggressive F-22 pilot. It was an older, deeper voice, transmitting directly from the underground bunkers of the North American Aerospace Defense Command. Flight 408, this is NORAD Actual. We are verifying authentication code. Stand by. Clarissa listened to the faint hum of the Boeing's avionics. Authentication confirmed, the NORAD commander's voice crackled, laced with unmistakable shock. Holy hell, it really is you, Viper. This is Major Tilden Reynolds. We thought you were completely off the grid. Clarissa smiled, a tight, grim expression that didn't reach her eyes. She remembered Tilden Reynolds. 12 years ago, he had been a greenhorn rookie wingman she'd chewed out for flying too loose in diamond formation over Baghdad. Now he was sitting in the big chair at NORAD. Good to hear your voice, Tommy, Clarissa replied coolly. Now, are you going to let your boys shoot me down, or are you going to give me a runway? Major Reynolds' voice returned moments later with new coordinates and emergency protocols. But the situation became exponentially worse. As Clarissa descended toward McCord Field, Captain Miller in the F-22 reported devastating news. Viper, you have a severe hydraulic fluid leak originating from the right main landing gear bay. The hydraulic lines ruptured catastrophically during your OVERG recovery maneuver. Your right main gear is jammed halfway out of the bay, hung up on a fractured hydraulic strut. Copy that, Miller, Clarissa replied, her knuckles turning bone white on the control yoke. If I try to put her down like this, the landing gear will collapse on impact and my right wing will strike the concrete at high speed. Major Reynolds interjected from NORAD. Viper, can you try to shake the gear loose? Attempt a negative G pitch or hard yaw maneuver to force it down. Clarissa's brilliant mind calculated the unforgiving physics. Negative, Tommy. If I yank this heavy bird around too aggressively, the asymmetrical drag will throw us into a flat spin. We don't have the altitude to recover from a spin in a commercial jet. I have to land it exactly as it is. Heavy rain began to lash fiercely against the windshield as they descended through 3,000 feet. The sprawling, heavily secured military base of McCord Field emerged from the dense grey mist. The long runway was lined with dozens of flashing red and blue emergency lights. Massive fire trucks and armoured ambulances were rolling down the parallel taxiways, pacing the runway in grim anticipation of a fiery catastrophe. 2,000 feet, Clarissa muttered softly to herself, her eyes flicking rapidly between the airspeed indicator and the digital altimeter. She was fundamentally a fighter pilot, accustomed to nimble, overpowered tactical jets that responded instantly to the slightest twitch. Currently, she was wrestling a wounded, unresponsive behemoth, forced to anticipate the aircraft's sluggish reactions several seconds in advance, just to keep it airborne. 500 feet, she announced into the radio. The wet ground rushed up to meet them with terrifying speed. Clarissa's entire world narrowed down to the bright white dashed line painted down the center of the runway. Total focus, total isolation. She was back in the combat zone. 50 feet, retarding throttles now. 30 feet, 10 feet. Left main tires slammed violently onto the concrete. Massive shutters racked the entire airframe with a teeth-rattling jolt. Thick white smoke billowed wildly from the left landing gear as rubber gripped the wet, heavily foamed runway. Now came the truly impossible part. Clarissa shoved the control yoke hard to the left, utilizing the wing ailerons to artificially keep the heavy right wing lifted high into the air. She was essentially flying the airplane while it was already driving on the ground. "Hold it! Just hold it!" she whispered fiercely, every single muscle in her body trembling with absolute tension. Airspeed bled off rapidly. 100 knots, 80 knots. As aerodynamic lift decayed with the loss of forward speed, the heavy right wing finally began to drop. She physically could not hold it up any longer against the unrelenting pull of gravity. "Brace for impact!" Clarissa yelled into the cabin. Metal screamed as the heavy right engine nacelle struck the concrete runway with an ear-splitting, agonizing screech. Brilliant orange sparks flew upward in a terrifying shower, illuminating the gloomy, rain-swept afternoon. The aircraft jerked violently to the right, skidding wildly off the painted centerline. Clarissa stomped ruthlessly on the left brakes, desperately trying to keep the nose from swinging completely around into a deadly cartwheel. The torn metal ground savagely against the runway, carving a deep, destructive trench directly into the reinforced concrete. Deafening, screeching noises vibrated through Clarissa's bones. 60 knots, 40 knots. The right wingtip finally caught the soft mud beside the tarmac. But the thick chemical foam sprayed earlier by the emergency crews did its intended job perfectly. It suppressed the massive shower of sparks and prevented the spilled aviation fuel from igniting into catastrophic fireball. With one final bone-jarring jolt, the Boeing 737 groaned loudly and ground to a complete halt. It rested at a sharp angle, half buried deep in the muddy grass of the airfield's infield. Absolute silence fell over the shattered cockpit, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of rapidly cooling turbine engines and the frantic, heavy pounding of rain against cracked glass. Clarissa exhaled a long, shuddering breath. Her hands, finally releasing their death grip on the control yoke, trembled uncontrollably in her lap. "Evacuate! Evacuate immediately!" Sarah screamed, jumping up and popping the heavy cockpit door open. Out in the main cabin, emergency inflatable slides deployed with loud, explosive hisses. Terrified passengers began sliding down into the waiting, capable arms of military personnel. Heavily armed Air Force security forces and tactical paramedics swarmed into the narrow cockpit. Two strong medics carefully lifted Captain Lawson, hauling him swiftly out through the forward galley door onto a specialized medical lift. Clarissa unbuckled her harness and slowly stood up. Her legs felt incredibly heavy, like solid blocks of lead. She grabbed her thick-rimmed glasses from the center console. They had flown off her face during the violent landing. She calmly slid them back onto her nose. Stepping carefully out of the destroyed aircraft and sliding down the slick inflatable chute, her sensible professional flats sank deep into the thick Washington mud. She wrapped her knitted cardigan tightly around her shoulders, shivering intensely against the sudden chill of the storm. She was immediately intercepted by a towering, imposing Air Force colonel, flanked closely by Captain James Miller, the young pilot of the F-22 Raptor. Miller still held his flight helmet tightly under his arm, staring at the unassuming, bespectacled woman with an expression of absolute reverence. "Ma'am," the colonel said loudly over the wind, rendering a crisp military salute. "I am Colonel Harrison, base commander. Major Reynolds briefed me fully. Medical just reported that Captain Lawson is stable and currently headed to emergency surgery. You saved 52 lives today." Clarissa looked silently at the smoking, ruined wreckage of the Boeing airliner. Then she slowly looked up at the gloomy grey sky where the F-22s had disappeared into the clouds. She offered a polite, incredibly practiced smile, the exact same gentle smile she gave to anxious parents during routine parent-teacher conferences. "I am just deeply glad that everyone is safe, Colonel," Clarissa replied quietly, adjusting her cardigan again. "Do you think I could possibly get a warm cup of tea? I have a major physics symposium to present at tomorrow morning, and I really need to review my lecture notes." Miller chuckled softly, shaking his head in absolute disbelief. "Viper, you really haven't lost a single step." Clarissa paused, looking the young elite fighter pilot dead in the eye. The mild-mannered high school teacher faded away for just a fraction of a second, revealing the lethal, unbreakable, legendary ace hiding just beneath the surface. "Neither have you, Captain," she said smoothly. "That was incredibly good formation flying up there." She turned her back on the broken airplane and walked steadily toward the waiting row of emergency vehicles. Clarissa Robinson was a teacher again, perfectly disguised in plain sight. But the open sky finally knew her true name once more. Some powerful secrets, once forcefully unleashed, completely refused to ever be fully grounded again. She had tried to hide from her past for 12 years, but deep in her bones, she knew the truth. The sky would always call her back. And now, everyone who needed to know her name would never forget it. The dormant fighter ace had awakened, and she would never sleep again. Did this incredible story of hidden identity, high-altitude suspense, and unmatched bravery keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved watching Viper reclaim her legendary status to save Flight 408, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this thrilling video with your friends who love intense aviation dramas. Subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss another jaw-dropping real-life story. Leave a comment below with your favorite moment from Viper's incredible return to the sky. Was it the cardiac arrest rescue, the missile threat, or that impossible one-winged landing? Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.